Hello, everyone. We are going to talk about the grooming gangs scandal and the way that the government has reacted to it. The grooming gang scandal is one of those very unfortunate tragedies that have afflicted contemporary Britain. And it's been going on for decades here, and people talk about it for decades. But lately, it has received international attention because Elon Musk is using his X platform to spread news about it in this instance. He has made several interventions about the issue, and the government has focused much more on the tone he is using rather than his content. Let me just give you an example here. We have a news from GB News that says grooming gang leader is still living and working in Rochdale nearly 10 years after deportation order. And Elon Musk is pointing the attention of millions of people by asking, for instance, why has the British government refused to deport a convicted child sexual abuse gang leader to their home country? I think it's a very sensible question. Elon Musk has been doing this for many days, and you would presume that the government would think that the topic to talk about is the operation of the grooming gangs, but sadly they are completely trying to divert attention with their hold on mainstream media to completely different issues one would say of secondary importance in this case. Let's see here. We have on LBC, Shella Fogarty says, I don't think for a second he's interested in the well-being of those people. As Keir Starmer faces criticism of the grooming gang scandal, Shella Fogarty says Elon Musk is using the issue for his political interests and fueling a hate campaign against Jess Phillips. Right, I think that this is an obvious double standard here because we can definitely say that whatever Elon Musk is thinking about the issue, the government has also done the same in its response. They're definitely thinking of their political interests, and this is one of the reasons why they're blocking the national inquiry into it. We have here Labour from the Telegraph, Labour blocks grooming gang inquiry into Starmer's conduct as CPS head. Again, this seems definitely suspicious to anyone, any person with a sane, let's say, with remote reasonableness and sensibility would say that the government has to safeguard its own people. They have to protect its people. It's one of the basic duties of government. And when we are talking about one of the worst scandals, a tragedy, this is something to talk about. This is something that people are concerned with. And therefore, a remotely sensible government would want to address people's concern by it. So why they're blocking it is definitely not ringing any good bells. It's actually very suspicious. We have here the UK Labour Minister for Safeguarding blocks national inquiry into Pakistani sexual abuse gangs. Labour's Jess Phillips, Minister for Safeguarding, refused to back a public inquiry into child exploitation in Oldham, urging the council to handle it locally. And we have here the letter by Jess Phillips. And Elon Musk is criticizing Jess Phillips. He says here shameful conduct by Jess Phillips, throw her out. And he has used even more severe tone when he called her an apologist of the operation of those gangs. And as you would expect, people focused much more on Elon Musk's language rather than the actual issue. From a diplomatic perspective, it's definitely the case that Elon Musk used very severe language, and language that you could say arguably didn't necessarily help by merely retweeting and asking probing questions in the way, for instance, Rupert Lowe did it. Millions of people would still have watched. But still, there's a time and a place for everything. And I think that the number one topic that people should talk about these days is actually what happened. The scandal was allowed to go for so long because people weren't talking about it and because they were demonized as somehow far-right extremists or racists. They were deemed to be enemies of woke multiculturalism. And here, Keir Starmer, in his announcement, said that people who are talking about it essentially and are demanding for a national inquiry in a probing way, they're jumping on the bandwagon of the far right. You would expect a sensible government yet again to show to people that they aren't repeating the mistakes of the past. The mistakes that led to this scandal have the extent it had. But yet again, what is more important in this case isn't the actual crime for the government, at least the way they operate seems to suggest that it isn't. The thing that they care about the most is that people are talking about it. They are using a method for narrative control, which we see all across Europe, for instance. When we see when we see crime, there's a variance with respect to how it is being communicated and how it's being reported. The major question is whether the crime is committed by members of groups that are politically allies of the left at any particular moment. And you will see it every time that a member of a group that is politically allied with the left commits a crime, the mainstream media reports it as an isolated incident committed by a person with mental illness, for instance. They're trying to minimize it and say that there isn't any underlying deeper pattern. But when the crime is committed, or even less of a crime, even just words are spoken from someone who isn't politically affiliated with the left at that moment, it's suddenly an indication of a far deeper, let's say, demonic activity, like far-right extremism. And Keir Starmer does precisely the same. He's using that method of narrative control when he's talking about people jumping on the wagon of the far-right. Right now, this isn't what people should talk about. Right now, people should talk about the operation of the grooming gangs. Here we have Rupert Lowe, who has excellently criticized the government on this, both on X and in the UK Parliament. He says, Starmer's choice of words today, bandwagon of the far right, was a spit in the face. It was calculated. He chose that phrase carefully and he knew exactly what he was saying. A deliberate attempt to smear those of us who are voicing legitimate fury about the mass sexual abuse of white British girl by Pakistani men. He has misjudged this quite spectacularly. For years, using these insults to silence decent British men and women may have worked, but it will not work now. And you see that the criticism that the people who are criticizing the government and its silence, and also we need to say that this is consecutive governments. It isn't just the Labour government that was elected in early July 2024. The scandal is a decades-old scandal. When they are being denounced as far-right and as being people who care just about the narrative, we come across yet another double standard. Because one of the reasons why the scandal had the extent it did was that people weren't talking about it. People weren't talking about it because they didn't want to be deemed enemies of multiculturalism. They didn't want to be seen from a narratival perspective as being on the wrong side of history. So whenever leftists accuse people right now of caring much more about the narrative than about the people, they're actually projecting. There's the iron law of projection. Right, we have here Labour MPs shouting shame at Shadow Home Secretary Chris Phillips as he says it is not far right to stand up for victims of mass rape. This is diversion of attention. It shouldn't even be discussed. It shouldn't even be discussed. The main topic is the operation of the grooming gang scandal. They are literally trying to divert everyone's attention from it. Here we have a Labour member of Parliament reacting to the tough questions by Reform MP Rupert Lowe about what government will do about the sexual abuse gang scandal. And she says, I don't like the language. Yes, that's right, you heard correctly. She says she doesn't like the language, as if that is what is important. And here, for instance, Rupert Lowe had perfectly legitimate questions, like, for instance, will the government commit itself to deporting foreign nationals who have engaged in sexual abuse and have been convicted of it by a court? Here we have Mirror Politics publishing an article saying that Elon Musk tweets probed by UK counter-extremism unit as alarm raised over the risk to Britain. Now, the posts by Elon Musk are considered to be extremist in content and as posing risk for Britain. And here we have Fahima Mohammed saying that the term grooming gangs is racist. Yet again, someone focuses on language and on tone where they should be focusing on something much more important. There's a time and a place for everything. And this time right now, again, I will stress it again because it cannot be stressed enough. People should be talking about the grooming gangs. Right. And I want to say something here because there are legitimate concerns about the language and tone that people are using on Twitter, especially Elon Musk, for instance, when he's talking to Trudeau and he says, "Girl, you're not the governor of Canada anymore." This is definitely a concern. But I think a really good response here is by Brian Lilly, which we can use it also when it comes to the grooming gangs in the UK. He says, yes, this is Elon Musk's response to Justin Trudeau clapping back at Trump yesterday. You can't get angry at Musk for the crudeness of his seeming support for Canada being the 51st state. How about getting angry at Trudeau and the Liberals for putting us in this weak state? The same thing. People are constantly talking about the tone Elon Musk is using, but the question they should be using is why put the country in such a position in the first place, in such a position where its governments can be criticized with such a tone. And the same, unfortunately, criticism is the criticism by EU members. They are talking about Elon Musk's decision to host Alice Weidel, who is the leader of the AFD party, as election interference and as Elon Musk's attempt to weaken Europe. The EU has to blame but itself for the weakening of Europe. So people can focus on the tone Elon Musk is using. In some cases, it is definitely suboptimal from a diplomatic perspective, but we should never allow the mainstream media to divert our attention to matters of lesser significance. And in this case, they literally want people to talk about Musk's psychology, about Tommy Robinson's stance, about Jess Phillips's attack and criticism, the far right and right wing extremism, and whatever cares they have about narrative, racism, language, Islamophobia, and misinformation. Where in this case, the whole scandal operated to such an extent due to silence, not to misinformation. Obviously, when you're talking you're speaking in public, you risk making mistakes. You risk, in some cases, saying something that isn't accurate, but you have to take some chances. And I think that this is an indication of a total subversion of Western politics, because they are constantly talking about protecting our democracy, but they definitely treat people as non-citizens, and you cannot have both. We are talking about the total vindication of the defenders of free speech, who said that hate speech laws are precisely intended to make people not talking about the serious people, the serious issues. And having an inquiry would be the least a government could do to show that it cares about the issue. Rather than that, they are slowly habituating the population into not asking questions, about the orientation of the country, and also into not demanding accountability from the government.